Like many of our listeners, I lived through the Vietnam War. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll was the mantra on the streets in the United States, while many of our brothers were fighting an endless, seemingly endless war in Vietnam. And without a real motive or logical conclusion in mind, it appeared. Well, our guest, James Bradley, is an author. He's written five uh, works, including Flags of Our Fathers. In order to write the book, he actually lived in Vietnam for 10 years. I call that commitment. Thank you, James, for coming on the show with us and welcome.
To be here, John.
So tell me, what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I wrote Flags of Our Fathers about my dad on Iwo Jima. Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg did the movie Flags of Our Fathers. And then my second book was about Flyboys, about George Bush was going to get his head cut off. And I went back to the island and found the Japanese that were going to do it. And then I wondered, how did we get out into the Pacific? So I wrote a book about Teddy Roosevelt, another book about Franklin Roosevelt called The China Mirage. And then Vietnam, just like you, I was a kid. I was 13 years old in 1967 when my brother volunteered for the Marines. So, I watched Walter Cronkite and Mike Wallace and every single thing that was on TV about Vietnam. And then Vietnam was, it was in the movies. There's Platoon, there's this movie, that movie, and it was in the background. But I just thought, I've done the Pacific, but I don't know about Vietnam. So I ventured to Vietnam and I thought, I wrote four books. I think this will take me 3 years to write a book about Vietnam. But because of all the gobbledygook that I had been fed by American propaganda, John, it took me 10 years. The reality in Vietnam is like you can take everything you've learned in the last documentary you watched about Vietnam, the books you read about Vietnam, and just flip it opposite. And that's what happened.
So the Vietnam book is titled Precious Freedom, but you categorize it as a novel. So is it fiction or is it a little bit of both?
It's history as fiction. It What happened was I had disparate. If you write about Iwo Jima, everybody's on the island. It's one geographical story, and I had years of interviews all over the place. So to smash everybody together, I had to make it a novel. So yes, maybe the grass was a little worn on over here, or there's a name that but it's basically history is fiction. Everything is based on interviews with American Marines and with Vietnamese. I interviewed Vietnamese who worked for Ho Chi Minh. I interviewed
Wow.
Vietnamese who killed Americans when they were 15.
Mm.
I went out to the fields and the rivers and the mountains and had the Vietnamese vets take me out and recreate the battles. So that's why it took me 10 years.
So what part of Vietnam did you live in?
I lived all over the place, but the Marines were, if you look at them, Vietnam is long. And if you look at Vietnam, kind of in the middle is Da Nang. That's where the French invaded in 1858, and that's where the Americans invaded in 1965, the Marines. And so north of there is a town called Dong Ha. That was the Marine base that I focused on. And to my shock, if you look at the publicity on this book, Oliver Stone, who is a Vietnam veteran, says, if we knew what James Bradley reveals, if we knew this back in the 60s, American mothers would not have let their children go to Iraq and Afghanistan. What he's talking about is that civilians pushed the Marines out of this area of Vietnam. I'll repeat, it wasn't armor, it wasn't the North Vietnamese army, it wasn't trained soldiers, it was sandal clad civilians, many of them chicks, girls, who pushed the Marines out. So when the Marines came to Vietnam, it was filmed in the middle of the day. And when they left, it was in the middle of the night. And it's really hard to even find out how they left because they ran away. They were beaten by civilians. That's the shocking part of this book. And the female aspect. It took me about 6 months of drinking tea to get my first interviews. Guys who look like me, we killed about 3
Mm.
million Vietnamese.
Mm.
So, and they didn't know what I was going to write. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to write because
Haven't
so
done the
no,
research yet.
but nobody had ever, the shocking thing, John, is I'm the only American author who has gone to Vietnam and asked, how did you win? And I didn't think this was a difficult question because I caddied for Vince Lombardi when I was a kid in Wisconsin. Bart Starr's cottage was 3 doors down. I played in the Green Bay Packers houses as I was a little boy. You know what I mean? And
I
it was a
do.
win or lose.
I'm
If if
envious.
if you lost under Vince, you looked at the film. How did that happen? What was their plan? Why did we lose? And that we have not done to this day with Vietnam. So I went to Vietnam and just, I'm like, just what would Vince Lombardi ask? He would say, how did you win? So I found out the answers, and I am shocked to this day that I'm the only guy who has documented how they won. The narrative in America is we could have won if only. If only the politician, no, no, no. If only the LBJ or Nick, no, it was Nixon. No, no, no. It was, we should have just gone up like Patton and invaded. And if only Westmoreland had, the narrative in America among the vets is we could have won. And what my book, I want to put these American vets at peace. They didn't have a chance. The Vietnamese had a plan based on thousands of years of history. We portray them as just lucky in the swamps and ambush. No, 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 no. They had a plan. Ho Chi Minh spent 30 years in the West studying Western media. I'll repeat. Ho Chi Minh, the first thing Sun Tzu says in The Art of War is know your enemy. Ho Chi Minh went to Boston, New York, Paris, London to study the media. And he came back after 30 years and he said he chose he chose General Giap. His name is Giap. It's pronounced Giap. General Giap, Trump recently talked about our great generals, MacArthur and Eisenhower. And well, he's got to go back to guys trained in the 1910s and 1920s. General Giap is the winningest general of the 20th century, and we don't study him. They had a plan. It wasn't luck. General Giap beat the French, Japanese, the Americans. He beat the Chinese. Vietnam's the only country in the world that's defeated 3 of the 7 UN security members. John, Vietnam, if you count reserves, has the largest army in the world today.
What was the world obsessed over when it came to Vietnam? I mean, it's not a hugely wealthy country. I don't know what the natural resources are. Is it militarily in a strategic location that people just had to have it? I mean, I never understood the war in Vietnam. I don't think most Americans understood the war in Vietnam. And you are actually offering a new explanation that I have never heard before, but don't challenge you on it. I was always told that we didn't win the war in Vietnam because we didn't try hard enough, that we didn't have the will to win, and that if we did try and win the war, it would bring us into direct combat with the Russians, and that could erupt into a world war. That was always my impression. But you're telling us something very different from that.
Yeah, the narrative you just said is the Dallas Cowboys could have beat the Packers in the Ice Bowl. They just didn't try hard enough, and their fingers were cold. And no, 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 they lost. The Dallas Cowboys lost.
What was the mission? What was the goal? We were told that it was to stem the spread of communism. I assume that you challenged that as well.
No, I don't challenge what the American government said. I mean, that's what they said. I didn't say I challenge anything they
Well,
said.
no, I said I assume you would challenge that, but go
No,
ahead.
no, no, no. That's what Johnson here. I'll tell you about our great press. Johnson in 1967 is up against the wall, and the press says, Mr. President, in a press conference, why are we in Vietnam? And listen to what the press accepted from Lyndon Johnson. This is the President of the United States. I think if you saw a little child in this room who was trying to waddle across the floor and some big bully came along and grabbed it by the hair and started stomping on it, I think you would do something about that. So that's what that's what the President of the United States explained why we're in Vietnam. He didn't know. If you look at what Johnson said for 4 years, it was we had to go in because we were attacked. We had to go in because if we don't stop them now, they're going to be in Hawaii and in California. And then it went to if we don't fight in Vietnam, we're going to have nuclear war. I'm fighting to prevent nuclear war. And then, if a kid waddles in, I mean, what? Johnson was all over the place, but he didn't want to get shot in the head like JFK, who said no to Vietnam.
Yeah, well, guess who shot JFK in the head?
I don't have to guess. But Eisenhower takes 3 years to put his last speech together. And he says, you better watch out. The military industrial complex is growing too fast and it's brand
Yeah.
new and it can steal your republic. Then a little kid named JFK becomes president. And Curtis LeMay and Allen Dulles and a lot of people hate this guy.
Mhm.
JFK is seen as a saint now. He is to me, but he was hated by LBJ, who was going to go to jail if JFK didn't die. Blah blah blah.
Exactly.
But
Right. You're
listen to
right.
what LBJ said to the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Christmas party after JFK was assassinated. So come back to me, 1963, eggnog in the White House, and Johnson goes up to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and says, "Okay, boys, you give me my election, and I'll give you your war."
Mhm.
So Johnson didn't want to get shot in the head. So that's why we're in Vietnam. And now this is not James Bradley talking. I want to couch this that in the 60s, there was a guy by the name of David Shoup. Who was David Shoup? He was the US Commandant of the Marine Corps. David Shoup was awarded the Medal of Honor for heroism at Tarawa. Read my book about Iwo Jima. Tarawa was unbelievable. David Shoup got a Medal of Honor. He's one of the smartest Marines ever. And David Shoup resigned when LBJ went into Vietnam. He took off his uniform, put on a suit and tie, and went all across the country. You'll see in this book, Precious Freedom, David Shoup, a U.S. Marine, is saying, we cannot win in Vietnam. It's not worth the death of one American boy. Ho Chi Minh is the George Washington. Can I make this point right here with a visual, if you don't mind, John?
Sure.
This is the American view of the war. And tell me when you can see this. Can you see that?
Yeah, generally.
Okay, but
For our
that's,
radio listeners, it's an American flag tethered to a map, I believe.
well, if I could
Of
explain it,
Yeah, please.
the point is it's two countries. There's a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam separated by the DMZ. So that's what I and my brother, that's what Walter Cronkite told us. There's two countries, and North Vietnam is a bad guy. They invaded South Vietnam, and we're fighting for democracy in South Vietnam. That's total baloney. There was one country, and we invaded one country. I went to Vietnam, and they were like, Mr. Bradley, the New York Times had big imaginations. They said there were two countries here. Mr. Bradley, I never thought I needed a visa to visit my uncle in what you called North Vietnam. John, I went back to my hotel, and it took like a day of thinking. Every single documentary, watch Ken Burns. He starts out, well, there was a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam, and we went to defend South. No, there wasn't. That was a CIA Allen Dulles creation. It was called Indochina. The Vietnamese said to me, you know, Mr. Bradley, I was Vietnamese. I was born Vietnamese. But when the French drew the maps, they said I was something called an Indo-Chinese. And then we beat the French, so the Americans came in and they called me a South Vietnamese and they called my uncle a North Vietnamese. So we were just doing all this gobbledygook. In Vietnam, every single speech that the prime minister Ho Chi Minh gave was, there's only one Vietnam. So we hired a bunch of traitors to run South Vietnam. The guys who ran South Vietnam, the president, Tu, and Vice President Key, if you're watchers and listeners remember these names, those guys were traitors to the cause. They fought for the French. So it's like, you know, I mean, I don't want to make an analogy to the Civil War in America because it wasn't a civil war. They were paid assassins for the French. And then we came and put them in a suit and said, "You guys are Democrats, right?" And yeah,
Hmm.
we're fighting for democracy. We got a police force. We're beating everybody up. We got torture cells, tiger cages, and it's all paid by America. Yeah, we are very democratic. It was just our veterans got lied to. What they went to fight for never existed.
So zoom out 30,000 feet in retrospect. What do you make of all that?
I need to take the mind of everybody and talk about the world island. What's the world island? Well, you know South America and North America. No, no, that's not the okay. Australia, no, 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 no. The world island is this huge landmass that goes from China to Israel, from Russia down to Vietnam. It includes India, Iran, Russia, China, all the stands. That's one piece of real estate. It's called the World Island. And in 1905, a British guy named Mackinder, you can look this up, said, he who controls the world island controls the world. The world island has the most people, has the most resources. So that's why America is chewing on that world island. See, we look, oh, we're in Vietnam. Oh, no, no, no. Oh, we're way over there in Ukraine. Those are different. Oh, Afghanistan, they wear sandals. No, it's all the same world island that we're trying to cause chaos. Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, Vietnam, hit Taiwan, China. We can't let the world island get together because then America will be number two. My argument from having lived in these countries is America could double its GNP and be number two or number three. We could be a rich country with, high speed rail knitting us together and safe streets. No girl in a miniskirt is concerned about walking around Ho Chi Minh City at 12 midnight.
Hmm.
No, 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 no. Shanghai, I mean, it's like all knitted together. And, no country is perfect. No people are perfect. But my daughter lives in Taipei. You should see the quality of life that my friends who live in Asia have, the quality of life I had in Vietnam. The stabbings in the West, in Britain, they're stabbing in London and New York, and then the shootings in America. How come you don't hear about that in Vietnam?
So am I understanding you correctly that you think that it's your belief that Vietnam, um, or Iraq, Afghanistan are all part of one continuing effort to try and co-op or keep at bay uh, the great island, the world island?
Oh yeah, no, it's a definite strategy of the British and American militaries, and it's been for over 100 years. And Russia has the most resources in the world.
It doesn't appear as if we've made a lot of progress.
You've got to break Russia up. If you want to continue the American empire with 1,000 bases around the world, Russia has the most resources in the world. China has all the manufacturing. You're talking 3 billion people between India and China. If they knit that all together with the Silk Road and fiber optics and trains, they've got trains running from Shanghai to Germany now. You know, you can't let that happen if you're if you're an American military person. You got to interrupt that. I say, let it happen and get involved. Let's make money, you know, let's get
Yeah.
rich.
You've got a great insight, and you've certainly challenged a lot of the conventional wisdom and certainly the narratives that we've heard for 60 years. James Bradley, you're an interesting guy. You visited 22 countries before you were, or by the time you were the age of 22. That's more than I can boast of at the age of 72. How did you do that, and what motivated you?
When I was 13, I read an article by James Michener, who was the biggest selling author at that time. James Michener, Tales of the South Pacific and Sayonara with Marlon Brando. And he wrote an article. He said, he was talking to young kids, and he said, when you're 22, you're going to graduate from college and they're going to ask you, what do you want to do with your life? He said, it's a great question. Answer it when you're 35. He said, from 22 to 35, grow, do, explore, make mistakes. And then in the article, he showed that if he hadn't been broke in Spain and Afghanistan, he couldn't have written this book and that book. So at 13, I hitchhiked from Antigo, Wisconsin to Bass Lake. That was 18 miles. And I thought that I was an astronaut, had gone to the moon. I was 13 and I got up to our cottage at Bass Lake without my mom and dad driving. And then I just started buying maps, and I went to Miami, and I hitchhiked across the United States a few times. And then I went to the University of Notre Dame. I was president of my class, and a guy said, "Hey, you should go to school in Tokyo." Well, Tokyo, I didn't know where Tokyo was. Is that Beijing or, Shanghai? So I said, okay, I signed up, and then I found myself in Japan. And then when I was in Japan, I looked, they've got roads in Asia. So I hit the hippie trail, and a Japanese girl ran away from home from me. I put a ladder up to her second story bedroom. She came down at 3 a.m., and we took off for 9 months. I met the
Wow.
Shah of Iran's wife, Empress Farah, had some adventures. But yeah, I did 22 countries by the time I was 22, and that was all on my dime. I sold pot. I was the number one pots and pans salesman in the country, and I took that money and went around the world.
That's an amazing story. And while you were on that venture around the world, you were jailed in Berlin, as I understand it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I don't know how old everybody is, but there used to be a West Germany and a East Germany, and the West Berlin and East Berlin, and everybody was nervous about spies. And I was at a luncheonette, and there was a clipped American soldier-looking guy next to me, and I just said, "Hey, where are you stationed?" Well, he told me, and it didn't make sense because I knew that area because I had been selling pots and pans there. And I asked him 3 times to explain, where are you based? And then I didn't pay attention to him. I thought there was something wrong with his head. And then I didn't notice, but he went to the telephone and he did what he was trained. If anybody asks you too many questions, just call the MPs. So I saw the MPs pull up and I thought, I wonder what they're doing. And then I went back to my newspaper.
Who's MPs?
The American West Berlin was not ruled by the Germans. It was ruled by the English, French, and US military. It was not civilian. So West Berlin was a military occupation. It was like you're on a base. So I'm
I'll
in
be
a
darned. What circa what?
circa 1975.
I'll be darned.
So I see the MPs and I think, oh, I wonder what they're doing. And then about 2 minutes later, they shove my head down into my breakfast. and handcuff me, and I spend 3 days in solitary confinement in an underground jail cell. This is it sounds dramatic, but it was 75. There was no internet. They had to cable back to the US, who is this guy? And then I had a fold out passport. They were like, "Why were you in Afghanistan? What were you doing in Pakistan, Mr. Bradley? Mr. Bradley, you were in Iran for 5 months. What were you doing in?" You know what I mean? I was on the trail where opium dealers were also. I hadn't done anything, and they let me go, but they had to hold me just to check me out. That was a lot of fun, solitary
So they
confinement.
jailed you under what premise? That you were a spy?
No, I mean, they jailed me because they had to, because a guy asked me questions. It was a military city. This is There's no logic to it. You're not talking about justice. A guy said, I'm suspicious, and they threw me in jail. It didn't cost them anything. When they let me out, I said, "Are you going to apologize and explain this?" And they said, "Do you want to go back in your cell?"
Jiminy
There,
Christmas.
it was a military. This is not as big a deal as it sounds. It was a military situation, and they had to. I wrote a lot about George Bush. I slept in two of George Bush's homes. The old man, 41. You know
Yeah.
what? They checked me out. I'm sure they downloaded my computer. There was a white van out in front of my house before I met Bush. And you think, well, they're spying on. No, 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 no. Let's say I got some poison into Barbara Bush's nose and she
Mm,
died. The New York Stock Exchange would fall down. You know what I mean? Who
sure.
let this guy in? So, there's something called security. George Bush up at Maine, he had anti-aircraft missiles outside his window. You know? It's not safe to be a president who runs a war.
No doubt.
But he was a great guy with the old man 41 was a very smart guy. Didn't talk much. He listened a lot.
Former head of the CIA.
Former head of the CIA, a lot of secrets there. And
Pictures of someone looking very much like him in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963.
so, why did George Bush cooperate with me, an author? I went to him and I said, "President Bush, I know where you were shot down in 1944 when you were 21. I've been to the island. Nobody else has.
Hmm.
And I know the guys who are going to chop your head off." And they chopped off the heads of 8 aviators and they
Yeah.
barbecued their livers. So I had known all this stuff. And Bush said, "I can't talk to you. My son is president. I can't talk to the New York Times, Reader's Digest. I mean, I just have to say no to everybody." So I thought about it. And the next day I said, "Mr. President, my book, Flyboys, ends when you're 21 in 1945. So you're not president. I promise I won't ask you any questions beyond 1945. And Bush looks out the window and he says, "Does this mean we don't have to talk about Iraq?" And I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I promise." So George Bush let me hang around with him. I took him back to Japan to where he was shot down. We put him in a little rubber boat. Time magazine covered it. A CNN, Paul Azan did a 1 hour documentary. This was all based on secrets that the head of the CIA, George Bush, the former president, didn't know the stuff I was telling him. So I brought him back to his youth.
Now, what a wonderful experience, and what an incredible life you have lived, and you continue to live an extraordinary existence, as I understand, on the island of Mauritius.
Mauritius, yeah.
Mauritius. Why did you choose the island of Mauritius in the
You
middle
know,
of the Indian Ocean?
I mean, 10 years in Vietnam, like it wasn't lollygagging around. It was pretty intense. And I was talking to people. Everybody I can't say it that way. I would estimate that many of the people I interviewed are the survivors of like 30 Dead. You know, I interviewed the the woman, the opening scene in the book. You see this guy Chip shoots a man. Well, the man is the father of May. May is 15 years old. So May is a little farm girl, and she immediately, oh man, the Americans are enemies. They wear those types of uniforms, they have helmets. I'm going to kill every American I ever see. She hikes to the forest, and there's people trained by Ho Chi Minh's brilliant People's War strategy. And they turn May into a sniper. And May comes out of the forest, and with patience, she gets 5 medals for killing 5 Marines. This is a 15-year-old girl. This is what's shocking about this book, Precious Freedom, is that
Hmm.
girls helped push the Marines out of northern part of Vietnam. But, so this is very intense. I have the book, like a first draft of the book, and I need to just get away from Vietnam to get perspective. And I'm an island guy. So I've done 5 books on the Pacific. The military, U.S. military calls it the Indo-Pacific. So I thought I'd come to the beaches here in Mauritius. So right now I'm next to Diego Garcia. I kid that when I'm sleeping, I can hear B-52s over my head going to Diego Garcia. We're putting armaments out here to bomb Iran. We just put military hardware into Nepal and Bangladesh for the first time. The American press is not reporting. St. Martin's Island is like right over here. It's right off the coast of Bangladesh. And the American military wanted it. The prime minister of Bangladesh said no. So, guess what? There were riots in the street, a coup. We kicked the prime minister out, and we installed a friend of Bill Clinton. So, and the U.S. military took St. Martin's Island. So we are militarizing the Indo-Pacific. I mean, we're militarizing the Pacific like you can't imagine. But the Indian Ocean part of it, hey, I see billions of dollars of American money flowing out here. So I came here to clear my head about Vietnam, finish Precious Freedom, and then it's a great place to be. I don't know what else to say. I'm a beach guy.
You've led such an extraordinary life and you've met so many incredible people and you've visited some of the most remote places on earth. Have you ever worked in conjunction with our United States government or any government for that matter? I mean, inquiring minds just want to know. My journalistic inquisitiveness forces me to ask the question.
No, I mean, I sold pots and pans door to door. I went to University of Notre Dame. I was president of my freshman class. This is documented. A guy said, "Why don't you go to Tokyo?" I signed up for it. I was the number one pots and pans summer. What they call me? Summer salesman, pots and pans, waterless cookware. And I put the money in my pocket, went to Japan, and then I hitchhiked around the world. That it sounds like a big deal, but we were staying in like hotels that would cost 25 cents a night. That was I went around the world on $2,000. $2,000 was a lot of money in 1974, 75. So this isn't like I had some big support and I was staying in first class hotels, you know. So anyway, I went around the world. I sold pots and pans in Germany and Italy so I could go back to the United States to get my degree. I went to New York. I was in the entertainment business. I worked with Bob Hope, Ella Fitzgerald, Tony Bennett, doing entertainment for big corporations. And then I went to London to run a company. I had an office in Tokyo. So I was traveling that way. I was a businessman. And then I wasn't getting satisfaction. And I perceived that I wasn't really a businessman, like my father. So I sold out and I went up to Mount Everest Base Camp. And I said, I'm not coming down till I figure out what to do. And if you're
It's
up at
cold
Mount,
up there.
well, I'm from northern Wisconsin, you know, but I mean, it's cold in northern Wisconsin and
Yeah,
it's
for
cold.
sure. You
The
got
big
cabins in northern Wisconsin.
The big thing about Mount Everest is that you can't breathe. So to put
Yes.
on a boot, you're see, to have this conversation would take a long, but anyway, I'm up there and I find a book by Dick Francis. Now, what does that mean, find a book? There's no books up at Mount Everest. You can, I mean, it's all grit and cooking, and you're up there trying to survive. So I find this greasy shelf and I have a light, a headlamp, and there's a book smashed in the soot next to this a wall where there's a fire and blah blah blah. And I pry this book out, the cover rips off, and it's a book by Queen Elizabeth's favorite author, Dick Francis. And he said, I was a jockey, I never imagined writing a book, and I got hurt, and now I write books, and you can too. So I thought, I want to be creative, but I'm not a businessman. Maybe I should be an author. And the thing is, if I had been in New York and said to my friends, I want to be an author, they would have, ridiculed me, and I probably wouldn't be an author today. But I was up in the middle of nowhere where nobody could, I couldn't talk to anybody other than the sun and the moon. And I just imagine myself as an author enough that, now I've written 5 books, but Flags of Our Fathers, was turned down 27 times. So everybody says, "Oh, Mr. Bradley, I understand how Flags of Our Fathers became a New York Times #1 bestseller." And I'm like, I wish you were around when I was pitching it. I pitched that book for over 2 years. I have 27 letters from 27 publishers telling me that Flags of Our Fathers was a dud.
Well, you certainly proved them wrong, and so did the American people that bought the book, or I guess people across around the globe who bought the book. Where do we find it, and how is your latest book, Precious Freedom, doing?
Well, Precious Freedom will be published November 11th. But if you go to Amazon.com and pre order it, it helps the media. Guys like John Gordon will start to pay attention if they see pre sales. So it's doing, a lot of people are emailing me that they've purchased the book, but nobody can read it. I don't have a copy. I have not physically held the book. It's just coming off the production line. But November 11th, it'll be shipped out. And I'm not trying to, pump a book, but I think it's going to sell because I'm the first author who ever went to Vietnam and said, how did you guys win? And then I did something amazing. I wrote down what they said. That's never been done. All can
You started your career selling pots and pans, and so you've got that in your DNA as one salesman to another. You're not bothering me by pumping the book. I think I'm going to put it on my wish list and go to Amazon right now and get an advanced, I'll pre-order the book. But thank you so much, James, for coming on today. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I've learned a lot, actually, and I'm grateful to you for that.
Well, that's very nice of you to say that. And come on out to Mauritius. We'll take a walk on the beach.
I just got back from Europe and I'm still trying to recover from the jet lag. Mauritius is how many hours? 43?
You know, I mean, it depends on connections, but you're into 37 to 42 hours. The
Holy
Indian
cow.
Ocean is enormous. You've got to fly, you know, I mean, Europe, you can get there in 8 to 10 hours. You're talking like 30 to 40 hours to get out here. You've got to go to
Wow.
Europe and then the Indian Ocean is a lot of water.
And imagine that. And we've got a better internet connection than a lot of our other guests who are just around the corner. James, thank you again. And best wishes to you. How do we follow you? How do we keep up with you?
JamesBradley.com. And anybody can send me an email there. I'll be happy to answer. You can see my bio, my 5 books, jamesbradley.com.
Thank you so much, James Bradley. Best wishes to you, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you, John.